Hello everyone, and welcome back to Inside ArtScroll, where the books you read and the people who write them come to life. Today I am privileged to be joined by Reb Moyshe Silk, the translator and annotator of a brand new 3-volume set of Kedushas Levi ala Torah, a groundbreaking work, Reb Moyshe, a work of many, many years. I believe you told me 30 years. 30 years of work with a team. And here we are celebrating a monumental release. So we're very excited about it. First of all, a tremendous mazel tov to you. I'm sure it feels like a burden has been lifted from your shoulders. You've been carrying this for so many years. You had your eye on the ball. You wanted to do this project. You undertook it. And to see ArtScroll Mesorah now release this, not even 1 volume at a time, but 3 volumes at once, a monumental set that will enrich so many people is really a remarkable achievement. So first of all, mazel tov.
Shkoyach, thank you so much for having me, Rav Yitzchak, and I'm still processing. So when I wake up in a couple of weeks, I'll let you know how I feel.
It really is. It's amazing to behold the fact that I believe you were the one who told me that this may be the first complete Sefer Chassidus released by ArtScroll and the Mesorah Heritage Foundation, which alone tells you something about the significance of this achievement, and also about the times, what people are looking for, what they want to learn, what they're seeking. Talk about that for a moment and what you've seen from being so involved in this undertaking.
I'm sure that Rabbi Zlotowitz and Rabbi Sherman and Rabbi Grandeur will correct us if I'm wrong, but it is indeed my understanding that this is the first whole Sefer Chassidus that ArtScroll has put out. And I feel that the community, the Olam chalished for titles and works of this nature. There's a demand for it. There's a demand for Chassidus, and there is a demand for the type of Torah and presentation that the Kedushas Levi provides. And we'll talk about this, and I'll unpack it a little bit later, but it's not only a sefer of very lofty and complex thinking that ponders the mysteries of creation, but much more than that. And my views have changed in looking at it over the decades, but much, much more than that. And this is what I've been focusing on over the past year, are the very, very simple messages in virtually every, not every Torah, but virtually every shtickle that the Kedushas Levi writes of simple avodah, simple emunah, simple kavanah. And there is a predominant amount of the Sefer that guides and uplifts the individual in his or her avodah, simply put.
Now, before we get into the Sefer, I would love to hear a little about your own background. First of all, where you grew up, who influenced you, and whether there was a Chassidic element of that influence, especially when you were younger.
Yeah. The story begins, my connection with what I call Heimish, begins with birth. I would cover three periods of my life, 3 major periods, actually a 4th period of Chicago, later Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, mainly Baltimore, and then Hong Kong, where I was for 13 years, but more recently, the more recent 20 years in New York. I was born to first-generation parents. All of my grandparents were born in Europe. I was very close with all of them, but I had a very, very special connection with my maternal grandfather. My oldest is named after him. He was a Yid who was very short, very small in stature, but who was an immense giant in my eyes. He was born in the shtetl of Nadverna. I'm aligned with Nadverna Chassidus. My Rebbe is the Nadverna Rebbe in Borough Park of Shlomo Leifer. And my grandfather grew up in the shtetl. He came to Chicago when he was 20 years old. And I'm gifted to have a chronicle of his life because he wrote, when he arrived in America, he wrote a novella that talks about his family's life in the shtetl. And I have that and beautiful pictures and letters from between my grandfather and my great aunt and my Alta Zayda in the Heim.
So your formative years were spent primarily in Chicago?
Yeah.
What was the Chicago of that period like?
Jewish life was, as I remember it as a kid, it was very single-dimensional. This is my recollection. It was very single-dimensional. There were not nearly as many shapes, sizes, colors, gradations between black, gray, and white as there are today. And as far as I understood, at least until I was older, we were Jewish. I didn't get the distinctions between European, inter-European issues, European, Sephardic. Everybody was basically Jewish. It was very single-dimensional. What I knew mainly about Yiddishkeit was my, obviously, school, but outside of school.
Which was?
I attended elementary school, public school, and I also attended Rabbi Hech's, he and his wife, Allah B'Shulam, ran a school in Skokie Valley.
And that was for public school students, like a talmid Torah of some sort?
Yes. So those were the early years.
And you remained in public school till what grade?
Basically through my whole education.
Through high school?
Yes.
Wow.
I was chalishing to switch when I was a teenager. When we had moved to Miami, I had my eye on I forget the name of the school, what it was called, the Torah Academy, and my best friend went to school there, but our family circumstances did not allow it, financial circumstances, and so I went to public school throughout.
So this alone, I must say, is a revelation to me for a public school educated child to have even a modicum of Talmudic background and the ability to ultimately go on to translate and elucidate such a comprehensive work. How do we get from A to B?
A couple of different steps. Step number one was drive. It was something that I wanted to do, and just to fill in a little bit more about the background of my grandfather, he was a talmid chacham, serious talmid chacham. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but when I pieced together everything today and over the years, he lived in a simple house. He did not have many possessions. He definitely didn't have many sfurim. But when I look at his writings, things that he wrote, speeches that he gave, he had clearly off the top of his head Gans Shas Bal Peh, Gans Torah Bal Peh. I can share with you when we get together at my house. And it was a Varmkeit. His father and grandfather were Sofrim in the Shtetl. They were aligned with the Nadverner Rebbe. And that was a constant push and a constant drive of my wanting to stay connected to my grandfather and my great-grandfather. As to the other dimension of your question, which is basically the skills and the hard skills, two parts of that answer. Part number one is that I cannot claim, and I will not claim, being the translator, quote unquote, of this work. I edited every word that's in there, and I was involved in every phase of project management, but I had a team of translators, not one of whom either can claim that they translate the whole of the work, but I had a group of very, very gifted translators who were with me at different phases of the work. But in addition to that, from I would say 18 or 19, I've had a daily chavrusa throughout, and I was going to get on to the next phase, which is Washington and Baltimore. So I was able to kind of open my eyes and horizons a little bit when I attended Georgetown, the School of Foreign Service undergrad. I attended a shul called Kesher Israel, which is at the time where Herman Wouk used to daven. And I had a friend from Mexico, Shlomo Rabinowitz, who was a good friend of mine, and we started to learn together. But it was really when I got to Baltimore that I started to learn in earnest to pick up a little bit of lost time, or a lot of lost time. And I'm very pleased to say that from 1983, which is when I arrived in Baltimore, until today, of the chavrusas that I had in Baltimore, I'm still learning on a regular basis with one of them, Avram Steinberg. And he's a Ner Yisrael boy. His father was one of the earliest talmidim of the Brisker Ruv. And we've covered a lot of ground over the years.
And that was at Ner Yisrael that you learned with him?
I was in law school at the time. Rav Avram was in Koilel at Ner Yisrael, and I learned with him as a part of one of the city programs that Ner Yisrael had.
So you never formally learned in any of the Moistis in Baltimore?
No.
So that's even more mind-boggling. How I guess you became self-educated.
You could
say that. Sounds like
you could say that.
You were talking about your drive.
Yeah.
You know, what I've learned is we've interviewed quite a few people in this chair, and everyone has their story. And you hear they grew up here, they learned in this elementary school, this mesifta, they went to that base medrash. It usually follows a certain formula. Yours is really an anomaly. In that sense.
I would say that every aspect of my life is like that.
Oh, okay.
I call myself special. Other people call me odd. But that's the Rheinemes.
Right.
So I went from Baltimore to Hong Kong. I was there for 13 years.
You were already married at the time?
I was married. Two of our oldest children were born there. Mm-hmm. And I continued the daily shiur there. Mainly with the Bachurim that worked in various of the moistis in Hong Kong. And it was in Hong Kong that I actually started this project. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you a little bit more about the learning in New York since I returned to fill out that whole picture, but maybe it's appropriate to talk a little bit about how the project got started, unless you'd like me to
I want to first touch on the Hong Kong component.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss at this point if I didn't mention many people watching this may recognize your name. You held a very prominent position in government, in the federal government. I don't know if I'm mistaken in saying that you may have been the highest, holding the highest position or something of that sort for any Chassidic person or something of that sort. Right?
To my knowledge, and again, in addition to Rabbi Brander and others who will correct me, but if there is somebody out there that knows, they could correct me, but to my knowledge, I was the first Chassidic Yid or Heritage Yid who was nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate for a confirmed position.
And that position was?
I had the great honor to serve under President Trump as the Assistant Secretary for International Markets, which is one of the largest briefs, certainly internationally, that Treasury has. I was one of the most senior ranking international financial diplomats of our country.
And is that a position that changes from administration to administration?
It is a politically appointed position. Okay. Typically, it is politically appointed. During transition periods, career officials within Treasury will take the position on an interim basis, but it is reserved for political appointees.
And you held that for the duration of President Trump's term?
I entered Treasury in October of 2017, and I assumed this position on an interim basis, the Assistant Secretary position, in 2019, and I held it for 2 years.
What was your qualification at the time for this position, and what exactly, to us laymen who don't really know what the undersecretary does, what exactly was involved?
The portfolio of the Assistant Secretary for International Markets covers, I would divide it into 4 or 5 main areas. One large area is trade, as finance is related. One large area is infrastructure finance, which includes development finance and export credit financing, which are covered by 2 of our federal agencies, the Development Finance Corporation and the U.S. Exim Bank. It covers fintech and financial regulation as it impacts on foreign financial institutions coming into America and our financial institutions abroad. And then in addition, although it was not in my portfolio to begin with, in March of 2020, I got a very, very big present on my desk, which was the instructions to set up effectively from scratch a $76 billion, which later turned into a $94 billion financial institution that implemented financial support for the airlines under the CARES Act. So through that work, we saved 700,000 jobs, and we kept the airlines flying during COVID. And it was the most pressured time in my career. It was certainly the most fulfilling thing that I've done in my work.
Did you receive personal accolades for what you accomplished?
I received the highest civilian award given by the Treasury Department, which is the Alexander Hamilton Award for Excellence, for all of the work that I did. And to get back to the question of what my qualifications were, I would like to think of my youthful energy and my good looks as factoring in, but the reality is that the administration recognized at the very beginning of the term and even during the campaign that China and infrastructure were going to factor very heavily into the agenda of the administration, and indeed they did. And I had practiced law for 30 years with very large firms. My last position was senior partner, which I held for 20 years, of one of the largest global elite law practices called Allen & Overy. The reason why I was in Hong Kong was because of my China expertise. And within the law, the sector and the types of product that I focused on related to some shape or form of energy or infrastructure growth. I did financings, I helped sponsors develop projects, I helped companies and funds buy or sell energy or infrastructure projects. So I was basically tapped to come into the administration to lend my expertise in those two areas, and indeed we put some very, very serious points on the board. And I was one of the senior negotiators in the China trade negotiations, and drafted the first agreement that we put on the table that later developed into the Phase 1 trade agreement that still governs our trade relations with China. And on the infrastructure finance side, I developed a program that the United States used throughout the world, but mainly in Latin America and Asia, to help our partners grow through investing in energy and infrastructure using mainly private capital. And my transactional skills that I had developed over 30 years were the reason why the Secretary chose me to develop and design the CARES Act programming for the airlines.
Now, most of what you just discussed about your job and its nature is way beyond my pay grade, and I'm sure most of our viewers. But what's interesting to hear from you is, as a frum Jew working for the federal government in a fairly high position, again, you had to be approved by the Senate for that position. Did you encounter any interesting interactions in regards to Shmir Shabbos, general Shmir's Torah mitzvahs, any memories from those years that you were in government that would be interesting to share?
Every day, every minute.
Oh, really?
Was a challenge, and it was an opportunity. My office was in the main Treasury building. I feel that I had the most beautiful office in the building. Please don't tell the Secretary I said that. I had a palatial office with vaulted ceilings that overlooked the east wing of the White House. It was mamish, a stone's throw away, and there were only two things standing between my proving that. Number one, the windows wouldn't open for security reasons, and number two, the snipers on top of the White House were in plain vision. So I never tried it, but that's how close I was. When Bibi came to sign the Abraham Accords, I saw him and Sarah walk out of the East Wing with their security detail after the signing to get into their cars. I was on the White House premises for the signing, but I went into the building, which main Treasury is on the White House campus. divided by the East Gate. I went into the building every day, dressed as you see me. I wear my uniform wherever I go. It's called a black suit, it's called a white shirt, and it's called a tie. I don't have my hat on right now as we speak. We're a little bit comfy in this interview, but I wore my hat in and out of the building every day. I was in the White House many times a week, if not daily, and I wore the same uniform into the White House. More or less, I don't know if you would agree with this statement, but I demonstrably look a little bit Jewish, if you know what I mean. And whether it was the legion of Secret Service that looked after the building, getting into the building, walking around in the building, who were the security detail for the secretary, who were right on our floor, the secretaries, the admin, the janitors, or other officials of my rank or above, I felt the pressure of the world on my shoulders because I knew that people were looking at me. I knew that people were listening to me. Sitting in the Situation Room, discussing a matter of high importance to national security, all eyes are on you. And I felt that my every move, my every action, my every word was the difference between a Kiddush Hashem and a Chilul Hashem. And Baruch Hashem, I think that we scored many, many points on the board. I remember distinctly walking over to the White House for a meeting with a number of members of my team. Vice President Pence was walking out, and I got a very vadam agris from the Vice President. He didn't know me by name, but he recognized that I was a religious individual. I think he had heard about me. And it was all eyes were on me. But on the flip side, I bring away many, many lovely and warm experiences from the job because I feel that I was able to use a lot of learning, a lot of wisdom, a lot of our sources, a lot of our approach, and more than a couple of good humorous jokes to help lighten things up, to help move things along. I had many instances with the secretary himself that I reflect on that were great stories. My wife descends from a very distinguished lineage, many Chushiva Rebbes, and we always wanted to make a difference. So for every yontif, I would bring things down from New York. I commuted every week. I went home to Borough Park in Shabbos. Every Shabbos, and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, my wife would bake leikach. So I would bring 20, 30 honey cakes down. I would send over to Jared and Ivanka and other people in the White House that were Jewish and friends of ours. And every year I would bring the secretary a honey cake. One year...
Who was the secretary at the time?
Secretary Stephen Mnuchin for the whole administration, who himself, I believe, is an einikel of the Kedushas Levi, I believe.
Is that right?
Yeah, based on as much research as we could do.
And is that something you discovered, or is that something he told you?
I heard about it. I don't think he knows who the Kedushas Levi is or the significance of it, but I have a very close friend, Moshe Rubin, who is a scholar in his own right of Mechaber Sfurim and a very solid genealogist who has looked into the matter. We've not gotten completely to the bottom of it. This is our view. So I was preparing to hand over the honey cake to him in this particular year in a meeting that we had with him in his small conference room. We had a meeting scheduled for one of the regional deputates to give a report on an issue that I had been tasked to conduct. So we had a deputy assistant secretary and his chief economist there for the report. The undersecretary, my boss, David Malpass, who went on to become the president of the World Bank, was sitting next to me. Smallish room, a rather large table, antique furniture, and other implements that were owned and used by Andrew Johnson. We get in the room, we're waiting for the secretary. The secretary comes in. It's very formal. We had to place our electronics outside of the room for security reasons. There was an issue. Somebody brought their phone in, a little bit of a pause. We finally all waited for the secretary to sit down. We sat down, and we're ready to roll, all eyes on the secretary, waiting for him to look up and give us the nod. As soon as he looked up, I said, Mr. Secretary, if I may, I've got one item, if I could, very important item that I'd like to table before we get started with the agenda. And he looks at me, the Undersecretary looks at me, and I took this beautifully wrapped honey cake, and I said, my wife has instructed me to give this to you, and I pushed it over to the table. Everybody cracked up. The Undersecretary kicked me under the table because I shouldn't have done it for the 10th time again. And this economist who was schwitzing away, twice every year probably gets called in the secretary, starts to give his report. You could tell when the secretary was engaged and not engaged, was listening and not listening, and he clearly was not listening because he was fixated on this honey cake on the table. About 2 minutes in, everybody giving me the look, the secretary says, I'm really sorry, but I have to tuck into this cake. I think I'm going to use one of Andrew Johnson's knives, which is over 100 years old, sitting on the side table. He keeps going. Another 2 minutes go by. He's clearly not listening. He says, gentlemen, I have to go get a knife. He walks into his office, comes back with a knife, starts cutting up the cake, and we enjoyed a little bit of honey cake.
And you didn't have to pay the price for your lack of keeping to the etiquette or whatever it might be.
I was and am always very comfortable to bend just a little bit. One always needs to know what the limits are.
Right.
But I feel very strongly that it's interactions like that that have really, truly lent to any successes that I've achieved in my career throughout. Whether it's with foreign officials, domestic officials, other counterparts within the government, lawyers across the table, the personal touch, the Warmkeit is what I think has helped in the success.
Fascinating. Now, before we get to the Sefer, now you left the federal government with President Trump's departure from the White House.
Yes.
What have you been doing since then professionally?
I needed a good couple of months to unwind.
Detox.
Yeah, and my mission after finishing up at Treasury was to complete 7 book projects, and this is one of them. I put one out over a year ago on infrastructure finance. We've got 3 or 4 more goodies that are coming the ArtScroll way. Another translation of a sefer, the Nadverna sefer, the Mamer Mordcha, and I've got 2 different projects that relate to the Rebbe Mordcha himself, stories and lore, and one other project about the policy work that I did. I originally wanted to focus and make sure that we got these projects out the door. It took a long time. We're over 2 years past that point, and I was approached by a couple of organizations. David Malpass, who was my undersecretary at Treasury and was until recently the president of the World Bank, asked me to join him and advise him on infrastructure finance at the bank, which I did for 2 years. I just finished at the end of June. I've been helping an infrastructure fund based in Israel with one of its portfolio companies here in the States, and most recently I've taken up a position with a very pioneering asset management platform called Hudson Sustainable, which works in transitional energy and sustainable infrastructure.
Right, I would say you're a reservoir, a repository of tremendous experience and knowledge and insight in the world of finance. You could almost kind of probably, am I right, that you could pick and choose almost at this point in your career what you want to do, almost like a freelancer?
I only do what I like to do at this point in my life. Yeah.
So that's having that liberty is somewhat liberating, especially because it allows you to work on the things that you're passionate about, like the Kedushas Levi. So I guess there's a benefit in that as well.
There's an immense benefit, and I feel that very strongly that I would not have achieved the successes in law or in government without the work that I do in Kodesh, and I feel that I would not have been nearly as successful or even able to complete and continue the work that I'm doing in this arena without my professional side.
So I love that you mentioned that. I'm going to segue for a second because I think this is relevant to many people watching and listening. We live in a world where some people are zeicha to spend their lives in the world of Kodesh. Most people, on some level, have to engage in chayil for parnasa reasons, but they want to hold on to the Kodesh also. I think that's the aspiration of every good Erlich Yid. He wants to really that the Kodesh should be the priority, but unfortunately, this is the way the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world in such a way that we have to engage the world of chayil for parnasa purposes. And I think you're a great person to provide insight and chizik in how to balance the two.
Yeah. So the Kedushas Israel asked me to speak about this at the last convention, and as have many organizations. I have a really simple take on the issue. I only live in one world at one time. That's the way that I look at it. I really don't distinguish between the two, and I feel that this is the way that I've been able to achieve greater impact in all aspects, in all endeavors in which I'm engaged, in that there is very much a symbiotic relationship between what I do on the Kodesh side and what I do on the side of Chol. There's an interesting Gemara in Yuma, Rava. He has in front of him, I forget exactly, the Lashon Chamra, aged wine and fatty beef. So the question is, how do you look at it, right? It's obviously something that's there to consume, yes? And one could look at it if you're a certain type of person that you would associate words of gluttony with those two items, that I'm going to scarf the meat down and I'm going to guzzle the wine down. Rava has a different way of looking at it. He views those elements as something that will enrich and enable him and energize him to achieve higher levels of learning. In my case, my job as a partner, a very well-compensated partner, afforded me the ability to do a lot of things on this project that I would simply not have been able to afford, or that I would not have been able to do by way of infrastructure. I needed a massive infrastructure of Yitzchak just to manage the files. This is a 2,000-page book, okay? It's 2,000 pages. That's in print. In manuscript, it was many thousands of pages. There, with Ala Torah Ala Muadim, there are over 70 different portions.
Right.
So each portion was a file that had multiple drafts that was going through multiple systems and streams of work just to manage the files alone on the computer. I had secretaries, the support of my law firm. So it was taking what was apparently chol and using it to energize and to elevate it, right? And at the same time, I felt financially rewarded in my job. I felt a great ton of satisfaction in the work that I did, both for my clients, and I did a lot of pro bono work as well, which was extremely gratifying. Before, when I came back from Hong Kong, before I went into Treasury, I played a very significant role in the Kedushas Israel's pro bono legal services network. And so the satisfaction that I got from my work made me a happier, more fulfilled person that enabled me to really focus. Now, I didn't have 24 hours in a day, let alone 2 hours in a day every day to work on this project, but the time that I did have was very, very high quality, high impact time.
Now, speaking of this project, let's go unpack the monumental and daunting undertaking of bringing the Kedushas Levi to the English-speaking public.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found fascinating is that Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev himself did not write the Kedushas Levi, from what I understand. It was written primarily by his students, his talmidim, people who heard his Torah and wrote it down. And that itself presented a certain unique challenge, right?
So
translating, annotating.
Like every Jewish answer, yes, yes, no, no. It's correct, but it's not correct. So the origins of the Sefer are that the Rebbe spoke Torahs. He spoke Torah. And just like we have today, my Rebbe speaks Shalashidus Torah, we write it down. So talmidim, or his children, wrote it down. They were masader what was written down. And the Kedushas Levi reviewed it before it was published. And so it's true that he didn't write it, but they are his words, as rendered by somebody else and then reviewed by him. And by definition, because it covered different parashas through the year, and it's not as if they said, it's a go, we're just going to take the Torahs from this particular year. It was over many years. So the period over which the content was compiled was many years. I can't tell you how many years it was. I assume it's more than 10. And you and I speak differently. We have a different perspective as time moves on. And so the challenges that you pointed out were challenges of consistency in rendering language and concept over time. There were challenges of the Berditchev making assumptions about what the knowledge base of the audience would be. So he had a tremendous bank of knowledge, the Kedushas Levi, of Nigla and Nister. And I'm starting first with Nigla because he was not born into Chassidic tradition. He became aligned with the Nickelsberger after he was 20 years old. He had already settled his formative years in learning, and he was a Goen. He was known as a Goen. But there are many deep concepts presented in the book, in this work, and there are many thoughts that are not simple thoughts,
right.
And so and many of them were rendered in shorthand. The work on the book, this project, I don't want to call it a book, you'll excuse me. The work on the project proceeded over 30 years. So we started with a base translation. We had no idea. I had no idea. I just ran. I was running forward. So we started with a base translation. We knew that we needed to refine the translation. And then I had another person go over it after I reviewed it. By the time that we got to ArtScroll, 15 years later, the view at the time was that it's not ready for prime time. So I had to go back and do further refinement and let's call it unpacking. Until, Baruch Hashem, it was probably about 3 years ago, through a very close friend, Zvi Friedman, Howard Friedman, who's on the board, came with me. We spoke with Rabbi Zlotowitz and Rabbi Sherman, and they reviewed it another time, the more revised version, and they said, this is ready for prime time. To get to your point, though, on the challenges, once we got into working on a very refined product, the team at ArtScroll came to a firm view that there were many convoluted, challenging concepts that needed to be unpacked. And Rabbi Brander, whose fingerprints are all over, all over this book, right? He was very adamant that the work, the product, needed to read like a shir. Mm-hmm. Every concept needed to be unpacked, which meant that we needed to elucidate within the plain words of the Kedushas Levi, and where necessary, where we hit a concept, we actually would unpack that in our own way.
Like an elaboration.
Yes, so that the product would result in a person who is completely uninitiated being able to pick up this volume and read through it. Now, it was, I would say to you, that degree of difficulty just on achieving that, and Rabbi Brander was very adamant, and he was right, and we have him to thank for the content on this particular point, the development of this content. But in addition to that, we hit a number of major roadblocks. I'm talking about traveling 110 miles an hour on the Autobahn and hitting a concrete wall in layout and design. Mm-hmm. Because Rabbi Brander was very insistent that the way that we presented, because we had original word translation, we had elucidation, then we had further unpacking, that it be easy on the reader's eye.
Right. I think we could really show the viewers, and people are going to go out and buy it. And this is really where we see Rabbi Brander's genius. So much of what we benefit from ArtScroll volumes is thanks to Rabbi Brander's ga'inus in his field. He's the master of his craft. So over here we get to extol his virtues, which we don't do enough. But over here what I liked very much is this. Here's the text of the Kedushas Levi. As you mentioned, here's an introduction, like an introductory sentence. The text of the Kedushas Levi followed by the translation with the elucidation, where the words of the Kedushas Levi are in bold.
Yes.
And then in lighter font, you have that what you would call your elucidation. Yeah. Right?
So a couple of very, very interesting elements, just design elements and also content elements. First of all, the old story, I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter, I didn't have enough time to write a short one. We took every shtickle entry, every entry, and we synthesized and crystallized the main message, and we used that as the title of every piece. This is our work. But then in addition to that, underneath the title, the framing title, we have a framing sentence which encapsulates in a single sentence the main thrust of what that thought is about, right? But then after that, what Rabbi Brander's wizardry produced is different fonts that are distinguishable, but that mesh together when you look at them. And so I can't begin to say enough how utterly pleased we are, ecstatic with just the design element of
That's why, besides for the scholarly component of the content, the presentation, that we'll call it the aesthetics, is just off the charts. This is credit to Reb Shia, to Rabbi Brander. I would mention also, once we're mentioning, the beautiful cover designed by our own Reb Eli Krohn, who never seems to miss a beat. And of course, the visionary nature of what Rabbi Zlotowitz and Rabbi Sherman and Rabbi Brander do as a team to be able to, with foresight, to see what project will resonate with the masses, what people will connect to, and so on and so forth, and how to do it. It's just another feather in their cap. That's what I would say this latest project is. It's interesting what you mentioned before about the Nigla and the Nistar. You know, the revealed Torah, we'll call it, and the hidden Torah, which people usually associate with Kabbalah. These are inyanim that are beyond most people's comprehension. How did you decide which of those topics to kind of elucidate? And then there are times when you'll mention, this is beyond the scope of this elucidation, and you decide to kind of gloss over it.
So there are two levels of that question. The first level is a very basic one. There were staff here, mumches, and it was mainly Rebbe Lindinsky, who I'm immensely thankful to, Rebbe Brandon, Rebbe Sherman, who took the final view about what they felt was appropriate to keep in and what was appropriate to take out. There are not that many passages that were excised. Mm-hmm. In fact, there are a couple of the Sforim that didn't have anything excised. Where there was a decision to excise content, the Hebrew remains. Lashon Kodesh is there. And it could be that it's a sentence. or two sentences. In other instances, there might be the better part of one thought that is not in there, because it is clearly a very deep nature of Kabbalah that deals with Brias Olam Zachen. It deals with more mysteries of the world. I would say that 80%, 90%, there are so many concepts in here that I personally would not categorize as Kabbalah per se, as we know it, of the type of learning that we shouldn't be engaged in unless we're eminently qualified, but rather is more what the present world refers to as general Hasidus. But that gets then to the second aspect of the question, which is, how did we know what to elucidate and what not? So there's a standard in law, which is a very simple one. You know it when you see it. And if our standard was very simply Rabbi Brander's basic test, it has to read from top to bottom integrally, like one thought, one concept, one shir. And if we felt that an uninitiated reader would not follow, we would add a word, we would add a couple of words, we would add a phrase. And if it required more than that, then we have our explanations that are set off in English in between the translation.
Amazing. It's amazing. I was just looking in Parshas Ki Seitzei, it is. I mentioned to you where Levi Yitzchak breaks down the pasuk of Ki Karei Kan Tzipor, and every component of the pasuk he explains allegorically, and the way it presented in the Sefer, it reads so smoothly without that, kind of deliberate approach. It would be very hard to present it in this fashion.
I have to tell you in that regard that I've been looking at this work for over 30 years in the English. And there were times when I was editing that I was just feeling like I was banging my head up against the wall. It was just so hard. And I had one perspective about certain parts of the work. Once we got into this particular layout, I felt that finally the ikar of every Torah thought that's presented in many instances jumps off the page because of the brilliant design.
Wow. Any specific shtiklach in the Sefer that resonated with you? I mean, you've gone through the entire Kedushas Levi. You did it over a matter of 30 years. Well, what's your favorite shtickle from Reb Levi Yitzchak?
So, in response to this question, in my younger years, I still do a little bit, I used to infuse my own vodka for Shabbos and Yom Tov. And I had 30 flavors. And people would ask me, which one's your favorite, which one do you like the best? And my response always was, I can't have a favorite. How could you have like a favorite child? So, on many additional levels, kama v'kama, how could I have a favorite Torah? There are different days that I have a different favorite depending on what confronts me. I would, on a quantitative basis, the Torah without a close second that I have related to the most, and one that I have spoken on many times at many simchas, but I'm not going to tell you who the Balei Simchas were because I don't want you to rat me out that I used the same material more than once, is I believe it's the first entry in Parshas Vayetze, where the Kedushas Levi brings extraordinary imagery and allegory from traditional sources, from the Ramban, from other sources, from Medrash, to talk about actualizing the potential of the inanimate, focusing on the rock that he slept on, which, as we know from traditional sources, is the Eben Shesiu. And he gives the vivid imagery of the whole of the Beis HaMikdash. He wakes up, Ma'noira HaMakom Hazeh, and this is the Shar Shemayim through which all of the tefillas and the karbanos are going from the Beis HaMikdash that he saw from that rock. And the thought is about Klal Yisrael actualizing its potential, but to me, and I've used this in many practical contexts, it speaks to me that the thought has a ton to teach each of us on how we could most greatly actualize our own potential. But what I have been focused on over the past year or so, and most intensively over the past 3 to 6 months, now that we've gotten to the end of production, is I'm working on. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag a little bit. I didn't tell Rabbi Brander, Rabbi Sherman about this, so please don't let the secret out. But I want to do a follow-up volume on the practical wisdom of the Kedushas Levi. Short thoughts of not longer than a page, each of which brings out the wealth, the wellspring of messages that the Kedushas Levi have that are negeya to each of us in our daily belief and our daily avodah, because the Sefer is full of thought and content on that regard. What the importance and the role of truth is in our lives.
So that would almost be like the takeaways of the Kedushas Levi on a practical level, not a translation or an elucidation.
Yeah, and wow. I'm doing that on the basis of my reading now, and I have a few friends that are working with me on it, but I also reflect back on actual examples, actual circumstances in my own life where, I had the Kedushas Levi, I had the Maimar Mordechai with me every day at work. I had it with me. It was on my computer. It was on my mind. And I was sitting in I'll give you 2 examples. I was sitting in the middle of the China trade negotiations in Beijing, a very big palatial room filled with a lot of government officials, everybody playing political theater and reading off their scripts, trying to push the interests of the American people forward. And we had many, many challenging issues, one of which was getting access for United States and other foreign financial institutions into the Chinese market. And the argument that was coming to me from my counterparts was, you don't let our financial institutions into America. You're hampering, you're limiting them. So why should we open up to you? So little did this person know, this respected official on the other side, that I'd spent over 10 years, probably 15 years, representing Chinese banks coming into the United States, getting them licenses from the Fed and from the state banking authorities. I'd done my research on their asset growth in the New York market from 2005 to 2017, which was when we were negotiating 2018. Most of those banks were realizing double-digit growth per annum on their assets in America. But there were no limitations on any foreign bank.
So you had this information
I had
on your fingertips.
I had a graph, and in 1 year it spiked to north of 100% growth. 100% growth in 1 year.
Wow.
Whereas the U.S. financial institutions, foreign institutions, financial institutions in China, they were lucky if they were getting mid to high single-digit growth per year. And I'm thinking to myself, "Wus haks the Chinik?"
Right.
The emes is the emes, and there is a beautiful Torah in the in the beginning of Parshas Bereishis on this particular thought. The Medrash says how the Eibishter, through the mid of truth, had an issue, had tanis on the Eibishter when the Eibishter was going to create the world. So the God could not disagree. Aros gewarfen emes auf den Welt, so that truth would permeate all of the world and all of society, all of our relations. And it's truth. The bottom line, everything is truth. Truth is of the essence. That's my punchline on that one. And I was thinking to myself, I was schwitzing for months trying to get CARES Act relief out. And we were under extraordinary pressure. The world was falling apart. Air traffic dropped 98% in a very short period of time. We had to make the program work, but we had to do it in a way that looked after the taxpayers' interests and was in line with what the statute required. So it was a lot of pressure, and more work than we could possibly have handled. But on this last parasha on Akev, there's a beautiful Torah thought there about the importance of simple faith, and how the practical reality is that God never shoulders anybody with the challenge that they can't have. And if we remember the simplicity of that, we can keep going. It's just simple faith. Now there's a long discussion until you get to that conclusion, but that is a beautiful thought.
And a fundamental one for Yiddishkeit in general. Sure.
That really helped me through.
Wow. We've discussed so much. I'm in awe of what you've accomplished, both professionally and perhaps even more so with this Sefer, which Hashem will inspire so many people and open up the doors of Kedushas Levi to many people who would have found it daunting to open it up. Maybe they wouldn't be comfortable with the original Hebrew, or we spoke about the esoteric components of it would be beyond them, and here it is presented on a silver platter for them. So this is really exciting. Any final thoughts that you would want to share with the people who are listening, who are watching, as pertains to your own personal message or to the Sefer itself?
My simple thought is to buy one and give it a try. It's an exceptional work. A lot of energy and effort went into it to produce the product that we have, that we discussed. Many stages of work. It brings the thoughts of Lefum Saragra and Kol Hakavod L'Toiva to whole different levels. There were times where we just felt like how can I keep going? But we pushed on in accordance with the standards to produce a product that would be as user-friendly in content and presentation as possible, in order to realize the impact of getting the beautiful and the basic messages that are very relevant to our daily lives out to the readership of ArtScroll. We, in addition to the other elements that we spoke about of how we presented and the presentation, there's a 50-page index at the end, subject and source index, that anybody that's using this volume will find of immense
I should
help.
mention also something that I particularly have been enjoying is the sections interspersed based on where it falls out on the Seder of Kriyas HaTorah are the sections on Yomim Tovim. I saw there's a very large section on Rosh Hashanah.
Yes.
Just recently, Tu B'Av, a section on Tu B'Av.
Yeah.
And very, very enlightening. So I think people are really going to enjoy that as well.
Yeah, we realized that we could not do the whole of the Kedushas Levi, but we took Ala Torah and Ala Muadim.
Right.
And as you said, we put in the sections on Yomim Tovim in the appropriate places, not limited to the major festivals, also minor festivals as well. There are, I think, 2 points that I wanted to come back to. I don't know if this is the right time.
Yeah,
so first of all, we ran through Chicago, we ran through Baltimore, a little bit on Hong Kong. We didn't focus on New York from 2005 and onwards. So I relocated back to the States in 2005, to New York. Since 2007, my wife and I have been living in Borough Park, where she grew up, and it's been I have been in daily contact with my Rebbe, the Nadverner Rebbe, Rav Shlomo Leifer, for well over 20 years. And when I was in Hong Kong, I was in daily contact with him, but the physical proximity has allowed me to learn with him every day and be with him every day.
So you're Chavrusa of the Nadverner Rebbe?
I will admit, and I'm getting a little bit of Musar, maybe more than a little bit of Musar. We were a little bit challenged in keeping going when I was in Washington and during COVID, particularly because of the CARES Act work. I've told the Rebbe that I really wanted to concentrate all of my time and energy on getting this out. we learn, but not as frequently now as we did. But in Mirz Hashem, we will continue the daily shir. We had the daily shir going for 15 years, and only Gemara, but we will continue it on a daily basis. And I have him and his family to thank for immense pieces of this and this work and other aspects of my life. His one of his sons, who's daily with us in Borough Park, because he's got a couple of different sons. Rav Avram expects my call 2-3 times a day with questions that come up. So I have them to thank a lot, and of course, in addition to the ashpa of my grandfather that I spoke about a little bit earlier, I've been very, very gifted to have a close relationship with the Eichenstein family of Chicago. The Berditchev Rebbe, he very kindly wrote one of the akdamas. My grandfather, when he first came to Chicago from Nadverna, davened in the Berditchev Zayde shul, the Galicianer shul. So the family have been connected for over 100 years, and we've kept up the contact, and it was those memories of those types of people that I carried with me from childhood that kept the push going.
Wow! So there have been many influences.
Yeah.
People continue to influence you. Yeah. And we're the beneficiaries of that.
Yeah,
so
Hashem. And I wanted to. We didn't. We spent a lot of time talking about the project itself, the Kedushas Levi, the Sefer, but we didn't talk about the Kedushas Levi, the person. And I spent more than a couple of years writing the introduction, which is at the beginning of the project.
Biographical sketch. Right?
It's biographical, and there is a few observations about the Sefer itself. And I feel that piece of the project is very instructive and helpful to the readers, because it gives a very, very clear picture of what the Kedushas Levi was all about. And I think that people will see that there's a very stark contrast between the Berditchev, or the Kedushas Levi, that they know from the lore and the stories around him. Nice stories of Yisrael, and he is the person that's constantly defending to extremes in such elegant, simple, impactful ways. They will see a stark contrast between that and the Kedushas Levi, the talmid chacham. And they will see the breadth of his knowledge. An interesting point about him is that, as I said a little bit earlier, he started with pure nigla. He was a talmid chacham in his own right before he had any idea of what Chassidus was all about. And then he experienced, he lived, he was exposed to the beginning roots of the Chassidic movement.
That was through the Maggid of Mezrich?
Shmelk of Nikolsburg.
Oh, Shmelk of Nikolsburg, okay.
Who he went to when he was in his 20s, and it was very interesting because his shver did not want to allow him to go to Nikolsburg, to the Rebbe. He went once, and he was awestruck, and he wanted to go again. And his shver said, you cannot go, I'm not going to allow you to go. The Kedushas Levi staged a hunger strike. He didn't eat for 2 days, until his shver gave him rishis to go. And slowly he became affiliated with and learned with the Nikolsburger and other of the tzaddikim of the time. The interesting point, though, that I wanted to bring out is that he took his first stellar when the Nikolsburger left Richval, where the Nikolsburger had a rabbinate. He had a stellar in Richval. He took that over. And for roughly 20 years, there, Zhelechav, Pinsk, he was a Rav. He was a communal rabbi. He did not get to Berditchev until 25 years after he took on his first Rabbanis. And that period was typified by extraordinary conflict, extraordinary indignity, because of the fact, I believe, I can't say for sure, but I believe that the Berditchever felt that he was capable of walking the golden mean. He did not see the world in shades of black and white. He saw the world in very bright and brilliant colors. And to him, he felt that it was one and the same, and he could walk that path, but there were many folks that did not agree, and the history is replete with a lot of interesting machloikes. Mm-hmm. He finally got to Berditchev, where he spent the last roughly 25 years of his life. I kind of look at it as he was in Golis for a period of time, and then he finally made it. But even in the beginning of his time in Berditchev, there was still conflict. The Kedushas Levi could have been a very sharp person, very sharp with the tongue, contrary to what we see in the stories. Mm-hmm. There's one interesting instance that I bring out in the introduction where in Berditchev they had many different chevras, according to trade, according to line. Each chevra had its own shul where they davened, they had their own ruv, or maybe a couple of them shared a ruv. And the bakers, the chevra of the bakers and the tailors had a simcha one morning. Maybe a tailor and a baker were machtunim, and they had an einikel, and there was a bris. Those people and their rav, or maybe there were two rabbanim, were very, very anti the Kedushas Levi. They invited him. They wanted to be mechabed, and they said, "Please, we want to honor you with a bracha, divrei bracha, whatever." So hat ungewünscht that the Mashiach will come soon. We should be zeichet to see Mashiach. What's that got to do with the bris? They asked him. So he says to them, there's a Gemara in Masechta Shabbos, and it envisions that in the times of Mashiach, bread, baked goods, and malbishim, I think made of wool, will sprout directly from the ground. There's a Gemara. And they look at him and they say, so what? He says, so if Mashiach will come, and we have the opportunity to pick up the baked goods and the malbishim off the ground, we won't have a need for any tailors or any bakers, nor for their rabbonim. Mm-hmm. So he also, there is that dimension to him. One other very, very instrumental figure that factored in very heavily in my life and my learning while I was in Baltimore, and certainly after that, has been Rav Yitzchak Breitowitz. I first got to know him as my first-year contracts professor, and I lived right around the corner from him for 3 years. I found my way to his Shabbos table very, very frequently throughout the year, and regularly attended the shiur that he gave at the law school, in addition to law classes, and did plenty of separate learning with him on the side. And he's been a great inspiration and a great supporter over the years. And
Reb Yitzchak today is in Yeshiva Ar Sameach, correct?
Yeah, and he's an interesting balance when we talk about this whole issue of combining kodesh with chol and combining a professional life with a religious life. During the period that I knew him, he was a law professor, a tenured law professor at Maryland, and he was a Rav at the Woodside Synagogue in Silver Spring, a position that he served in for a couple of decades until he retired from both law practice and the rabbinate, and took up a position as a senior leader in Or Sameach in ArtScroll. And one needs only flick on YouTube to see his regular lectures. He's just extraordinary.
And you still learn with him today?
I'm in contact with him. I very frequently take advice from him. But his schedule and my schedule are a little bit harder to sync up. My Rebbe has time for me. It's just a 2-minute walk from my house.
You pointed out that the world recalls Reb Levi Yitzchak Berditchev as the defender of Klal Yisrael. Seemingly, there's less of a focus on his scholarship, which is, I think, what you were alluding to. Which I think comes across. People read the Kedushas Levi, you see the breadth of his knowledge both in Nigla and Istar.
Look at the index.
And look
at the index.
So that alone will be enlightening to people who learn the Sefer, especially those who are doing so for the first time.
And
think that's
I mean,
fascinating.
I brought the story out, and I make this point in the hope that if people are very attracted to the Kedushas Levi from the lore and the stories, which
Right.
they should be, they must be, right? They will see a whole completely other dimension of scholarship
Right.
and of direction on basic, simple, daily avoida, perspective on life that is not abundantly apparent in the stories. And that's a very good reason to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, 3 months looking through this.
There's no question about it. People are going to be blown away by what you've done.
It's Hashem.
3 volumes. It's a beautiful set. People should go out. They should buy one for themselves and another one to gift to someone else. Hashem,
Or 2 or 3.
or a few. Kishem shesiyamta sefer zu. You should be zeicha to be Messiahim svarim acherim. Hashem. Continue to share from your wellsprings of your knowledge and your passion and your appreciation for all different types of Torahs. And we look forward to continuing to benefit from all your wonderful work.
Shkoyach to you and shkoyach to the whole team at ArtScroll. And shkoyach, I'm very, very remiss in not giving a shkoyach to my team.
We're grateful to them.
Extraordinary translators. Reb Lazer Danziger did the original draft. Reb Moyshe Wisniewski did decades, literally 30 years of refinement.
Wow.
Rav Shalom Weinberg was very, very instrumentally helpful at the very end, and I had a legion of proofreaders led by a very gifted and talented woman, Yechevet Leah Perkal, and a young fellow that's joined the team recently, Ben Lichman. The extraordinary help, and I can't express my thanks enough to them.
So I echo that. We thank that extraordinary team for their crucial contributions to this project. And again, thank you, Reb Moyshe. I wish you and your Rebbitzin continued Hatzlach in all you do. Thanks for coming out for this conversation.